In the mid-19th century, the wider world was rapidly entering the industrial age. Cities were becoming incredibly loud, dark, crowded, and smoky. Massive iron factories were rising everywhere, and the old, beautiful ways of life were fading away into history. But high in the Bavarian Alps, time stood completely still. The ancient rocks remained perfectly unchanged. The forests grew thick, dark, and quiet, and the young prince watched the clouds pass and dreamed his grand dreams and quietly waited for his time to come. In the early spring of 1864, when Ludwig was just 18 years old, his father passed away suddenly. Overnight, without warning, the romantic, isolated dreamer was crowned King Ludwig II of Bavaria. Suddenly, he was thrust violently into the bright, blinding, and judgmental light of public life. He was remarkably tall, exceptionally handsome, and possessed a gentle, deeply artistic charm that instantly won the hearts of the Bavarian people. They looked at his striking figure and enthusiastically called him the Swan King, looking to him with immense hope, wonder, and adoration. But the young king did not desire power over men. He did not want to command massive armies, execute criminals, or negotiate complex, dry political treaties in crowded, smoke-filled parliament halls. The intense, fast-paced politics of the capital city of Munich felt like an iron cage to his gentle spirit. He found himself constantly surrounded by rigid politicians who demanded cold practicality, and calculating courtiers who whispered endlessly of war, taxes, and complex international alliances. Every single day, the overwhelming noise of the capital city pressed heavily against his sensitive senses. The ceaseless clatter of heavy iron carriage wheels on cobblestone streets, the shouting of aggressive merchants, the endless, repetitive ceremonies where he had to wear heavy, suffocating uniforms and fake smiles for massive crowds. It all felt incredibly artificial and deeply distant from the quiet, eternal truth he had known high in the mountains. Ludwig felt profoundly, devastatingly alone in the center of his own royal court. It was during this specific period of intense, painful isolation that Ludwig found a powerful lifeline in the dramatic, sweeping music of the composer Richard Wagner. Wagner's grand operas were filled to the brim with the exact myths, legends, and heroes Ludwig had loved so deeply as a child. Stories of Lohengrin, the Swan Knight, of Tannhäuser, and of ancient, magical kingdoms built on love and honor. When Ludwig sat in the dark and listened to this magnificent music, the physical walls of his palace seemed to melt away completely. He felt, for the very first time in his life, as though another human soul finally understood the deep, romantic longing and melancholy of his heart. He immediately became Wagner's greatest and most generous patron, pouring vast royal resources into allowing the brilliant composer to create his musical masterpieces without any financial worries. But for the king, listening to the music was only the beautiful beginning. Ludwig did not just want to hear these grand legends in a theater. He wanted to bring them into physical, tangible reality. He wanted to build real, permanent spaces where the ugly modern world could never enter. He began to envision a palace that would stand high above the clouds, a magnificent monument to art, myth, and pure beauty, completely and permanently removed from the anxieties and noise of the 19th century. The young king began to spend less and less time in the capital city of Munich. He would constantly escape to the deep mountains of his youth, choosing to live in near total isolation, sleeping during the bright day and wandering through the dark alpine forests at night. The simple, hard-working people of the mountains began to see him as a mystical, almost supernatural figure. He would ride through the snow-covered alpine villages at midnight in an incredibly elaborate, gilded sled beneath the brilliant moonlight, the silver bells jingling softly and rhythmically in the crisp, freezing winter air. He was searching with an intense focus for the absolute perfect location to build his grandest dream. He eventually found it on a rugged, breathtaking cliff face known as the Pullet Gorge, standing high and proud above his childhood home of Hohenschwangau. This was a place of extreme, untamed, and jaw-dropping natural beauty. A massive, jagged pillar of solid rock, surrounded on all sides by towering mountain peaks, with a roaring mountain waterfall dropping hundreds of feet into the deep, misty gorge below. To anyone else living in that era, the mere idea of building a massive, medieval-style stone castle on top of this narrow, completely inaccessible cliff was viewed as complete, undeniable madness. The logistics were an absolute nightmare. There were no roads up the mountain, no heavy machinery in existence capable of scaling such steep heights, and the terrain was notoriously unstable, rocky, and dangerous. But Ludwig did not see obstacles when he looked at the jagged cliff. He saw a perfect canvas. He saw a sacred place where his dream castle could rise like a natural, living extension of the mountain itself, floating forever between the green earth and the silent stars. In the late summer of 1868, Ludwig wrote a deeply personal letter to Richard Wagner, expressing his grand vision in beautiful detail. He explained that he intended to completely rebuild the old, forgotten castle ruin on the cliff in the genuine, authentic style of the ancient German knights' fortresses. He passionately described a place where the mountain air was perfectly pure, where the sweeping view stretched out endlessly across the deep blue lakes to the distant plains of Germany, and where the human spirit could finally find a total, unbreakable sanctuary. The very first foundation stones were carefully laid in September of 1869. It was the humble birth of what would eventually become Neuschwanstein Castle, the most famous, iconic fairy tale palace in all of human history. But for King Ludwig, it was never an architectural statement meant for the wider world to admire or praise. It was an intensely personal, private project. It was a massive fortress of stone built specifically to protect his inner world, his dreams, and his peace from the relentless, destructive march of modern reality. Welcome, traveler. Tonight, we step completely away from the rushing, ceaseless currents of the modern world. We leave behind the endless demands of tomorrow, the heavy worries of the day, the noise of crowded streets, and the constant, bright flicker of digital screens. None of those things can reach you here. Instead, we invite your mind to wander into a timeless realm, a place where the clock strikes with a softer tone, where the shadows of ancient mountains stretch long and quiet over silent, glassy lakes, and where grand dreams were carefully carved into the very stone of the earth. Tonight, our journey takes us to the deep, southern heart of Germany, into the historic and breathtaking region known as Bavaria. It is a land wrapped in the eternal, misty embrace of the Alps. Here, dense, emerald forests climb the steep, rocky slopes, and forgotten, moss-covered pathways wind through valleys that feel entirely untouched by the passing of centuries. Take a deep, slow breath. Let your shoulders drop completely. Feel the cool, crisp mountain air filling your lungs, carrying with it the clean, natural essence of the high peaks. Imagine the deep, soothing scent of damp pine needles, wet mountain stone, and the distant, frozen breeze blowing down from the snow-capped summits. In this magnificent place, the night does not arrive with a sudden, jarring darkness. It settles gently, like a vast, soft velvet blanket of deep indigo, slowly draping itself over the quiet timber villages, the winding alpine rivers, and the towering fortresses that guard the distant horizon. Our story tonight is not a tale of bloody wars, fierce politics, or loud historical triumphs. It is the story of a human mind that sought peace above all else in existence. It is the rich, immersive narrative of King Ludwig II of Bavaria, a man who found the harsh reality of his era too loud, too unyielding, and far too restrictive for his romantic spirit. In response to a world he felt alienated from, he did something extraordinary. He used his heart, his sweeping imagination, and his personal royal wealth to build a sanctuary, a series of magnificent, isolated fairy tale castles nestled high in the clouds, designed not for military defense, not for royal show, but as a quiet, sacred retreat for a lonely soul. As you listen to the steady, rhythmic cadence of my voice, let your thoughts become as heavy, still, and grounded as the ancient foundation stones of these grand palaces. Follow the calm flow of the words, leave all worries behind, and let yourself drift completely away into the quiet majesty of Bavaria in the 19th century. To truly understand the profound beauty and isolation of these silent palaces, we must first travel across time, back to the warm summer of 1845. In the grand, sprawling halls of Nymphenburg Palace in Munich, a young prince was born into the world. From the very beginning of his life, it was abundantly clear to everyone that Ludwig was vastly different from the children around him. While his father, King Maximilian II, was a deeply practical, rigid man focused entirely on the strict, demanding duties of statecraft, military affairs, and governance, young Ludwig was drawn like a magnet to the ethereal, quiet world of art, poetry, music, and ancient legends. He spent his most cherished childhood summers at Neuschwanstein Castle, an old, medieval fortress nestled deeply within the rolling alpine hills near the border of Austria. This particular castle was entirely surrounded by dark, whispering woods of pine and fir, and it directly overlooked two pristine, incredibly calm bodies of water, the Alpsee and the Chiemsee, the Swan Lake. It was here, during endless summer days, looking out of the high, cold stone windows at the perfect reflection of the massive mountains in the still, dark water, that Ludwig's vast imagination took permanent root. Imagine waking up as a young boy in a high room covered completely in vast, beautifully painted frescoes. The walls of Hohenschwangau were decorated from floor to ceiling with intricate scenes from old German myths and romantic poetry. Vibrant images of noble knights, ancient kings, mystical beasts, and pure white swans flighted across the plaster walls. Ludwig did not see these as mere decorations to be glanced at. To his unique mind, they were literal windows into a better, gentler world. A world governed by chivalry, absolute honor, and profound, unbreakable peace. He would spend countless hours walking completely alone along the soft, pebbled shores of the Alpsee, watching the majestic white swans glide effortlessly across the dark, deep, glassy water. The swan became his ultimate personal symbol, his lifelong ideal of absolute purity, grace, and freedom. The slow, perfectly rhythmic movement of the birds on the water became a comforting, hypnotic pattern in his young mind. Even as the immense, terrifying weight of his future royal duties loomed over his childhood, he found a deep, lasting solace in the absolute, unchanging stillness of the Bavarian wilderness. The air in these high mountains has a unique, almost magical quality to it. It carries a profound, heavy silence, the kind of silence that gently wraps around you like a protective cloak. It is a quietness interrupted only by the soft rustle of wind through the pine needles, the distant, musical murmur of a hidden waterfall cascading down a cliff face, or the occasional, lonely cry of an eagle soaring high above the canopy. For Ludwig, this specific silence was not just a preference, it was an absolute necessity for his survival. It was a shield against the pressures of a chaotic world that was rapidly, relentlessly changing outside his peaceful alpine valley. As the massive construction finally began, the quiet mountain valley was filled with a completely new kind of industrial rhythm. Hundreds of local craftsmen, expert stonecutters, master painters, and brilliant carpenters were hired from all over the region to bring the king's grand dream into physical reality. Exquisite marble was brought through great effort from the historic quarries of Salzburg. Massive, heavy blocks of sandstone were hauled up the steep, winding, and dangerous mountain paths by large teams of strong horses and oxen moving slowly through the mist. Ludwig watched the daily progress with an intense, quiet, and protective passion. He would sit for hours at the high windows of his childhood home at Hohenschwangau with a brass telescope, watching the brilliant white walls of the new castle slowly, steadily rise from the rugged gray stone of the high cliff face. Every single detail, every carving, every window frame had to be absolutely perfect. Interestingly, he did not hire traditional court architects to design the palace. Instead, he purposefully hired a theatrical set designer named Christian Jank. He wanted the castle to feel like a living, breathing stage play, a physical, tangible manifestation of a beautiful, romantic poem. Imagine the immense dedication and hardship of those local workmen, working high in the thin alpine air, completely surrounded by swirling mist, low clouds, and freezing winds. They spent years carving incredibly intricate wooden ceilings out of oak, laying delicate, massive mosaic floors stone by stone, and painting vast, breathtaking murals on the cold plaster walls. Yet, despite the immense difficulty and historical look of the task, Ludwig insisted on incorporating the absolute finest technology of the late 19th century. The castle was secretly equipped with an incredibly advanced hot air heating system, running water on every single floor, toilets with automatic flushing systems, and a complex electrical signaling system for the royal servants. It was a fascinating, beautiful contradiction. A grand castle designed to look like a forgotten medieval dream from a bygone era, yet built using the absolute finest, most modern innovations of the industrial world that Ludwig so desperately wished to escape from. It clearly showed the world that he did not hate human progress or technology itself. He simply, deeply hated the profound loss of beauty, romance, and spirit that so often accompanied the modern world. As the long years rolled by, the majestic structure grew larger and larger, completely dominating the mountain skyline. Its slender, graceful towers reached high toward the heavens, and its brilliant white limestone walls perfectly caught the soft golden light of the setting sun, making the entire palace appear to glow from deep within. It became a shining beacon of pure human imagination, standing totally silent, proud, and defiant against the dark green, eternal backdrop of the dense pine forests. But as Neuschwanstein rose higher into the clouds, the lonely king's isolation grew deeper and more profound. He retreated further and further into his nocturnal, secret lifestyle, completely cutting himself off from the world. He would spend his entire nights reading romantic poetry by the soft glow of candlelight, or walking slowly along the covered stone battlements of his unfinished palace, looking up at the silent, twinkling stars. The distant, warm lights of the small villages down in the valley must have looked like tiny, faraway planets to his eyes, worlds he had absolutely no desire to touch or belong to. He found a strange, beautiful comfort in the absolute darkness of the night. The night was profoundly quiet. It made no unfair demands on his soul. In the darkness of the night, there were no ministers asking for political signatures, no arrogant foreign ambassadors demanding long audiences, and no roaring crowds waiting to catch a fleeting glimpse of the king. There was only the cool wind moving through the deep gorge, the steady, rhythmic roar of the waterfall, and the magnificent, healing silence of the high mountains. Ludwig's complex mind was a delicate, beautiful tapestry of grand, cosmic ideas and profound, aching melancholy. He knew with absolute certainty that the practical world outside his valley did not understand him in the slightest. The politicians and newspapers viewed his passion for building as an incredibly expensive eccentricity, a tragic waste of royal resources and taxpayers' money. But to Ludwig, beauty was the absolute highest truth in the universe. A life lived without art, without grand, inspiring architecture, and without deep romance was a life that was simply not worth living. He poured his entire personal family fortune into the construction project, taking out massive, high-interest loans from international banks and completely exhausting his wealth to keep the building moving forward day after day. He did not care about the staggering cost in gold, because he was not building a palace for the political future of a royal dynasty. He was building a final home for his weary soul, a safe, sacred place where he could finally lock the heavy iron gates, pull the thick velvet curtains, and live entirely inside the beautiful legends he loved so dearly. The vast castle was a physical labyrinth of his deepest inner thoughts and feelings. Every single room was completely dedicated to a different grand opera, a different ancient myth, a different pure ideal. The magnificent singer's hall, the breathtaking gold-leaf throne room, the artificial grotto carved meticulously by artists to look like a magical, glowing underground cave. These were never spaces intended for royal banquets, political meetings, or courtly games. They were silent temples of quiet reflection and art, meant entirely for an audience of one lonely king. Now, imagine the sun slowly setting over the magnificent valley of Hohenschwangau on a perfectly quiet, crisp autumn evening in the late 1870s. The vast sky slowly changes from a brilliant, burning gold to soft shades of deep violet, warm pink, and dusky blue. The long shadows of the massive surrounding alpine peaks stretch long, soft, and still across the smooth surface of the lakes below, turning the water into dark, polished mirrors reflecting the sky. High on its rugged cliff face, Neuschwanstein Castle catches the very last, warm rays of the fading light. Its white limestone towers stand out incredibly sharply against the deepening indigo sky, looking for all the world like a silent castle made completely of cloud, light, and stone. The hundreds of workmen have packed away their tools and gone home to their families for the day, and a profound, heavy, and beautiful silence completely descends upon the mountain. Inside the unfinished, silent palace, the air is remarkably cool, carrying the scent of fresh mortar, pine wood, and the damp, refreshing mist rising from the Paulet Gorge far below. A lone, tall figure walks slowly and deliberately through the grand, red brick arches of the open courtyard. It is the king. He steps softly onto a massive stone balcony, leaning his hands against the cold iron railing, looking out over the endless sea of dark pine trees stretching out into the growing darkness of the valley. He stands perfectly still, listening closely to the rhythmic, comforting song of the hidden crickets, the gentle wind whispering through the bare branches of the maples, and the steady, ancient murmur of the waterfall below. In this exact, beautiful moment, the immense weight of the Bavarian crown feels a little lighter on his shoulders. The stressful noise and chaos of Munich are hundreds of miles away, completely erased and made small by the grand, eternal scale of nature. Here, high above the everyday world of men, Ludwig is not a political king bound by the cold laws of society. He is a pure dreamer who has successfully brought his dream into stone. He takes a deep, slow, and peaceful breath of the cold mountain night air, feeling the absolute, healing peace of the mountain filling his heart to the brim. The endless stars begin to blink into existence overhead, one by one, shining their ancient light down on the lonely king and his magnificent, silent creation. As the deep darkness settles fully over the land of Bavaria, the grand castle stands tall as an eternal monument to the incredible power of human imagination, a sacred place where the human soul could finally rest, hidden perfectly safe, warm, and protected behind massive walls of white stone, floating forever in a beautiful, forgotten era of peace. Welcome back, quiet traveler. As the deep indigo velvet of the late night sky completely envelops the world, we step once more into the quiet, protected realm of 19th century Bavaria. Allow the heavy weight of your daily thoughts to melt away into the soft shadows of the high alpine valleys. Let the gentle, natural rhythm of your breathing sync completely with the slow, steady whisper of the cold mountain wind moving through the pine trees. Tonight, we push past the grand, imposing white towers of Neuschwanstein, and we follow King Ludwig II into an even more private, hidden sanctuary. A secret valley wrapped in absolute, unbreakable silence, where magical mirrors catch the warm glow of 1,000 candles, and where the boundary between painful reality and beautiful dreams disappears entirely from existence. Imagine traveling south, deeper and deeper into the rugged Ammergau Alps, where the valleys narrow significantly and the majestic mountains rise up like ancient, stony sentinels guarding the secrets of the earth. Here, tucked away in an incredibly isolated glen, surrounded completely by dense, dark forests of tall fir trees and towering, ancient lime trees, sits Linderhof Palace. Unlike the grand, soaring castle on the rugged cliff face, Linderhof is much smaller, far more intimate, a royal, architectural jewel box hidden entirely from the judgmental eyes of the outside world. It was the only grand palace that King Ludwig successfully completed from start to finish during his short lifetime, and it was the physical place where he spent the most time, living as a solitary king in a beautifully constructed world of his own making. Take a slow, deep, and comforting breath of the cool, crisp air of the Ammergau Valley. Feel the pure, undisturbed serenity of this isolated location slowly surrounding your thoughts, calming your mind. Imagine the gentle, repetitive sound of a crystal-clear mountain stream flowing over smooth, cold pebbles just outside the heavy palace gates. A rhythmic, soothing melody that creates an instant sense of internal peace. In this quiet, magical valley, the stressful noise of modern civilization does not exist in the slightest. There are no political debates here, no demanding ministers, no heavy state papers, and no royal responsibilities to carry. There is only the timeless stillness of the deep trees, the soft golden glow of lanterns against white marble, and the deep, comforting embrace of absolute royal isolation. As we wander slowly through the secret gardens, hidden pathways, and heavily gilded rooms of Linderhof Palace tonight, let your mind become completely still and quiet. Let yourself sink deeply into the soft, luxurious cushions of the king's vast imagination, and feel the profound, lasting peace of a physical sanctuary built entirely for the comfort and protection of a weary, romantic soul. To truly and deeply understand the magic of Linderhof, one must first look into Ludwig's profound, lifelong obsession with the French Sun King, Louis XIV. To Ludwig's deeply romantic, artistic soul, the absolute monarchy of 17th century France represented the ultimate golden age of humanity. A beautiful, elegant time when kings were not mere political actors bound by dry constitutional laws and parliaments, but living gods on earth who ruled over magnificent worlds of pure art, elegance, philosophy, and high culture. Ludwig famously saw himself as the Moon King, a romantic, nocturnal reflection of that bygone French glory, ruling over a secret kingdom of shadow, silver moonlight, and beautiful, unchanging dreams. Linderhof Palace was built as a direct, passionate tribute to this historical ideal. The entire complex originally began as a simple, rustic royal hunting lodge owned by Ludwig's practical father, but over the course of many long years, the young king systematically and meticulously transformed it into a breathtaking neo-Rococo masterpiece of stone and gold. The exterior of the palace is crafted from a brilliant, dazzling white stone, beautifully adorned with highly intricate sculptures of classical gods, graceful angels, historical emblems, and elaborate, carved floral wreaths. It stands tonight in perfect, stunning, and poetic contrast to the wild, rugged, and untamed nature of the surrounding Bavarian mountains that crash against the sky. Step inside the grand entrance hall of the palace, and your eyes are instantly greeted by a massive, bronze statue of King Louis XIV on his royal horseback, standing proudly beneath a high ceiling painted beautifully with vast scenes of the French court. The air inside the palace is remarkably heavy, warm, and still, carrying the faint, aristocratic scent of expensive beeswax candles, highly polished exotic woods, and old, rich silk fabrics. Every single surface you look at is covered completely in thick gold leaf, fine porcelain from Paris, and heavy, deep violet velvet drapes that completely and permanently block out the natural, bright light of the sun. King Ludwig did not build this magnificent palace to host grand royal balls, political dinners, or to impress foreign dignitaries from across Europe. In fact, no outside guests were ever invited to stay at Linderhof Palace during his entire reign. The entire immense structure was designed from the ground up to be a quiet echo chamber for Ludwig's own complex mind. It was a private space where he could walk slowly from room to room in absolute, uninterrupted solitude, completely surrounded by the historical images of the figures he loved, and pretend, if only for a few peaceful hours, that the cold, practical 19th century did not exist outside his front door. As you walk deeper into the highly private apartments of the lonely king, you come across one of the most fascinating, brilliant innovations of Linderhof Palace, the private royal dining room, which contains the famous Tischlein Deckdyke, or the mechanical wishing table. Ludwig's desire for absolute human isolation was so incredibly profound that he could not bear the physical presence of servants even while he was eating his daily meals. He did not want to see human faces, hear quiet whispers, or feel the judgmental eyes of courtiers while he dined in his palace. To solve this difficult psychological problem, his brilliant royal engineers designed a complex mechanical dining table connected directly to a heavy system of weights, iron pulleys, and hand cranks beneath the floor. The dining table sat directly over a hidden trapdoor in the center of the floor, leading straight down to the royal kitchens on the lower level of the palace. When it was time for the king to have his dinner, the servants below would prepare the finest delicacies, arrange them beautifully on the table with fine silver and porcelain, and crank the entire table up through the floor into the king's private dining room. Imagine the tall king sitting completely alone in his grand dining room at midnight, the entire space beautifully illuminated by the warm, flickering light of a massive porcelain chandelier. The silence in the room is absolute and heavy. Suddenly, with a soft mechanical click and the gentle, low hum of iron gears turning beneath the floorboards, the majestic table rises gracefully from the trapdoor, laden with steaming hot soups, fresh mountain trout caught from the alpine streams, and fine French wines from the royal cellars. Ludwig dines in complete, peaceful solitude, watching the dancing reflection of the candles in the golden panels of the walls. When he is completely finished with his meal, he simply rings a small, silver bell, and the table silently and smoothly disappears back down through the floor into the darkness below, leaving the private room exactly as it was before, perfectly still, perfectly quiet, and entirely empty of human presence. This mechanical marvel was not just a playful royal toy. It was a desperate, protective shield for his mind. It allowed the king to maintain the beautiful illusion of total independence from the modern human world, successfully transforming a basic human necessity into a silent, solitary ritual of pure peace. Now, let us step together into the true crown jewel of Linderhof Palace, the magnificent, world-famous Hall of Mirrors. This specific room was Ludwig's ultimate psychological sanctuary, a magical place where light, glass, and pure artistic illusion combine to create an infinite, weightless universe. The room itself is relatively small in physical size, but its walls are covered completely in massive, floor-to-ceiling mirrors framed beautifully and deeply carved, thick gold leaf woodwork that twists like vines. When King Ludwig entered this grand room at midnight, the royal servants were strictly ordered to light hundreds of fine candles placed on delicate crystal chandeliers, golden wall sconces, and beautiful ivory tables scattered throughout the space. The visual effect was absolutely mesmerizing and otherworldly, because the massive mirrors faced each other directly on opposite walls. The warm light of the hundreds of candles was reflected back and forth, infinitely, creating a breathtaking, endless illusion of a majestic hallway that stretched out for miles into the dark, starry night. Imagine standing completely alone in the absolute center of this room at 2 o'clock in the morning. The heat from the thousands of flickering candles creates a warm, gentle haze that seems to float mystically in the air. Everywhere you turn your eyes, you see an endless, shimmering procession of golden arches, flickering flames, and silent, dark rooms stretching out into the deep fabric of eternity. The physical, heavy stone walls of the palace seem to completely vanish from your sight, replaced entirely by a limitless, magical labyrinth of pure light, gold, and reflection. For Ludwig, this room provided a profound, deeply necessary emotional comfort. In the harsh political reality of Munich, his royal power was being systematically limited and stripped away by modern laws, strict politicians, and tight government budgets. But inside the Hall of Mirrors, his domain was completely infinite, absolute, and untouchable. He could look into the reflecting glass and see an endless empire of pure light that belonged entirely to him and his imagination. He would sit for long hours on a rich, blue velvet sofa, surrounded by the infinite reflections of his own solitary figure, reading classic literature or listening closely to the silent symphony of his own thoughts. The mirrors also served a much deeper, spiritual purpose for the king. They beautifully blurred the rigid line between what was physically real and what was a grand illusion. In this magical room, a single burning candle became a vast galaxy of stars. A single lonely king became an endless, powerful army of royalty. It was the perfect physical, tangible manifestation of Ludwig's unique mind. A quiet, sacred place where the boundaries of a harsh, disappointing reality were completely shattered by the sheer power of artistic illusion. Outside the white stone walls of the palace, the royal gardens stretch out beautifully across the valley floor, designed with the exact same meticulous, dramatic precision as the interior rooms. The grand gardens of Linderhof are a beautiful, harmonious fusion of formal French geometric design and wild, romantic English landscapes. Terraced lawns climb up the steep hillsides, adorned with white marble statues of classical mythical heroes, perfectly manicured hedges, and grand stone staircases that lead up to a beautiful classical temple dedicated to Venus. In the absolute center of the main garden sits a massive, golden fountain basin. At noon, or under the soft, silver light of the midnight moon, a powerful hydraulic engine hidden in the woods would pump water high into the air, creating a magnificent jet that reached a staggering height of over 100 feet. The sound of this fountain was a constant, rhythmic backdrop to life at Linderhof, a steady, soothing, and roaring rush of water that perfectly drowned out the quiet whispers of the mountain forests and any internal anxieties. Imagine walking through these magnificent gardens on a warm, still summer night. The mountain air is thick and sweet with the scent of blooming roses, damp earth, and wild jasmine. The full moon hangs low and heavy over the jagged mountain peaks, casting a pale, silver glow over the white marble statues and the dark, glassy water of the fountain pools. King Ludwig would walk these gravel paths for hours at a time, his long velvet cloak brushing gently against the dew-covered leaves, finding in the structured, perfect beauty of the gardens a deep sense of absolute order that he could never find in the chaotic, confusing world of human politics. High above the White Palace, built directly into the side of a massive, solid limestone cliff face, lies perhaps the most extraordinary, theatrical secret of Linderhof, the Venus Grotto. This was a completely artificial, man-made underground cavern designed specifically to replicate the mystical, magical setting of Richard Wagner's famous opera, Tannhäuser. It was an absolute engineering wonder of the late 19th century, built using strong iron beams, secure wire mesh, and thick layers of plaster painted meticulously by artists to look like natural, jagged stalactites in rocky cave walls. Inside the mysterious Venus Grotto, the atmosphere is completely and undeniably otherworldly. A massive, artificial underground lake sits in the absolute center of the dark cavern, its deep water dyed a brilliant, glowing shade of emerald green by the king's orders. At the edge of the lake sits a small, private beach made of fine sand, adorned with a massive, beautifully carved royal throne shaped like a golden conch shell. The rocky walls of the cave are painted with vast, dramatic scenes from Wagner's operas, illuminated beautifully by a revolutionary new technology for that era, an early form of electrical lighting designed by Werner von Siemens. King Ludwig would have his engineers change the colors of the electrical lights to suit his exact emotional mood. One night, the entire underground cave would be bathed in a deep, fiery, and dramatic red light. The next night, it would glow with a soft, ethereal, and calming blue or a warm, golden orange. The king would sit completely alone in his grand golden shell boat, rowed slowly across the glowing green water of the underground lake by a silent, trusted servant, listening intently to a hidden opera singer perform beautiful arias through the acoustic echoes of the deep cavern. Imagine the absolute, striking surrealism of this historical scene. Deep inside a cold, dark mountain in Germany, a king floats slowly on an artificial green lake in a golden shell boat, completely surrounded by changing electrical lights and the haunting echoes of operatic music, entirely cut off from the planet above. It was the ultimate, absolute escape from reality. Here, hundreds of feet beneath the heavy earth, the stressful 19th century could never find him. There were no newspapers here, no wars, no royal budgets, and no human disappointments. There was only the pure dream. The Venus Grotto was a sacred place where Ludwig could completely step inside the art he loved so dearly. He was no longer just a spectator watching a play on a distant stage in Munich. He was the main character, living inside the ancient myth, physically surrounded by the magical elements of the story. It was a beautiful, deeply tragic monument to a human being who preferred to live beneath the earth in a constructed world of plaster and colored lights, rather than face the cold, gray reality of the changing world outside his valley. As the long years advanced, Ludwig's visits to Linderhof Palace became far more frequent, and his behavior became even more eccentric, protective, and reclusive. He began to completely reverse his daily schedule, sleeping through the hot, bright hours of the daytime behind thick, heavy velvet curtains that blocked all light, and waking up just as the sun was setting behind the high peaks of the Ammergau Alps. To the local mountain peasants who lived in the valley, he became affectionately known as the Ghost King of the Valley. They would often see his grand, gilded carriages or his massive, silver winter sleds tearing down the dark, narrow mountain passes at midnight, beautifully illuminated by the bright, sputtering glow of oil lamps. The king would sit deep within the fast-moving carriage, wrapped tightly in heavy furs and silk velvet, staring out at the dark, passing trees with a distant, deeply melancholy gaze. He would often stop his carriage at isolated mountain chapels in the middle of the night, stepping inside to pray in absolute solitude before disappearing back into the darkness. Despite his extreme isolation and eccentricity, the local mountain people loved and respected him deeply. He was always incredibly kind and generous to the poor woodcutters, humble farmers, and mountain peasants he encountered on his night walks through the woods. He would often leave valuable gold coins on their wooden tables or give them expensive royal gifts, asking only for their discretion, their loyalty, and their absolute silence from the Munich press. To them, he was not a distant political ruler. He was a kind, mystical, and protective figure who belonged to the mountains themselves. Inside the quiet walls of the palace, his private diaries from this specific period reveal a human mind locked in a constant, agonizing, and deeply moving struggle. Ludwig was a deeply religious man, raised with strict values, yet his romantic, artistic soul was filled with intense passions, longings, and artistic visions that he felt he could never truly reveal to the conservative, rigid society of his time. He felt constantly judged by his ministers, deeply misunderstood by his own royal family, and profoundly alienated from the fast-paced, industrial era into which he had been born. Linderhof Palace was his only true medicine, a beautiful, golden prison where he could temporarily soothe the aching loneliness of his romantic heart. Now, let the grand image of Linderhof Palace fade softly and completely into the quiet, peaceful stillness of a midnight autumn frost. The great golden fountain in the garden has been turned off for the cold season, and its deep stone basin is covered in a thin, fragile, and beautiful layer of crystal-clear ice. The grand terraced gardens are completely silent tonight, their white marble statues covered in a soft dust of white snow that catches the silver light of the cold mountain moon. Inside the grand hall of mirrors, the hundreds of candles have long since burned down into small, quiet puddles of warm, forgotten wax. The infinite reflections of the golden arches grow dark, faint, and deep, stretching out into a peaceful, velvety shadow that fills the entire room. The mechanical dining table sits perfectly flush with the wooden floorboards, completely empty and still, waiting silently for a master who always preferred the company of ghosts, myths, and legends to that of living men. High in the dark Venus grotto, the emerald water of the underground lake is perfectly flat, still, and glassy, reflecting the cold, unlit plaster stalactites that hang above. The golden conch shellboat sits tied securely to its small stone dock, rocking gently, almost imperceptibly, in the dark, silent water. The entire valley of Ammergau is wrapped tonight in a profound, heavy, and beautiful silence. A quiet so deep that you can easily hear the soft, rhythmic breath of the snow falling gently through the dense pine branches high on the mountain slopes. In this dark, peaceful, and hidden valley, King Ludwig found the only true, lasting peace he would ever know in his troubled, melancholy life. Linderhof Palace stands tonight not as a symbol of royal greed or madness, but as a beautiful, heartbreaking, and eternal testament to the incredible lengths a human soul will go to protect its own internal light from being extinguished by the cold winds of the world. Let your mind rest completely in this quiet valley, protected by the massive mountains, wrapped safely in the gold and velvet of a beautiful, unchanging dream. Welcome back, quiet traveler. As the deep indigo velvet of the night completely envelops the world, we step once more into the grand, misty landscapes of 19th century Bavaria. Allow your mind to become as still, smooth, and undisturbed as a mountain lake at midnight. Let go of the heavy anchors of daytime stress, leave behind the noisy worries of the waking world, and let your consciousness float safely with the slow, rhythmic cadence of my words. Tonight, we leave behind the rugged, soaring mountain cliffs of Neuschwanstein and the narrow, hidden valleys of Linderhof Palace. Instead, our journey takes us toward a vast, shimmering body of water known as Lake Chiemsee. There, hidden in the very center of the deep lake upon a completely isolated, forested island, sits King Ludwig's most ambitious, expensive, and hauntingly unfinished dream, the grand island palace of Chiemsee. Imagine standing alone on the absolute shore of Lake Chiemsee at midnight. A thick, silver mist hangs incredibly low over the dark, cold water, completely obscuring the distant horizon. The only sound in the absolute darkness is the gentle, repetitive lap of tiny waves against the pebbled shore, a rhythmic, soothing melody that creates an instant sense of internal peace and tranquility. Far out in the center of the lake, completely cut off from the mainland of Germany, lies the secret island of Herreninsel, the island of men. It is an isolated sanctuary covered in ancient oak forests, dark pine groves, and silent, mossy pathways. And there, buried deep within the dark, whispering trees, stands a palace built to rival the sun itself, yet left in a state of magnificent, heartbreaking solitude. Take a deep, slow, and deeply calming breath of the cool, damp lake air. Feel the pure, undisturbed serenity of this isolated island slowly washing over your thoughts, clearing away any remaining anxiety. In this beautiful, magical place, the chaotic rushing of modern human society is completely separated from you by miles of deep, protective water. There are no crowded cities here, no political councils, no heavy state responsibilities, and no loud demands of the modern era. There is only the vast lake, the whispering oak leaves, the heavy silver mist, and the profound, unbroken comfort of absolute, peaceful isolation. As we row slowly across the dark, glassy water and step onto the silent shores of Ludwig's secret island tonight, let your mind rest completely. Settle down into the calm, luxurious depths of this grand historical dream, and feel the deep, lasting peace of a sanctuary built by a king who wished to disappear completely from the face of the earth and live inside his own imagination. To fully and deeply grasp the grand, cosmic scale of Chiemsee, we must look into Ludwig's growing obsession with absolute perfection and historical resurrection. If Linderhof Palace was a private, intimate jewel box built as a personal tribute to the French Sun King, Chiemsee was intended to be something far grander, far more monumental. It was designed from the beginning to be an exact, line-by-line architectural copy of the Grand Palace of Versailles in France. King Ludwig did not view this massive project as a simple act of political vanity or royal pride. To his deeply romantic, artistic soul, the original Versailles was a sacred temple of divine royalty, art, philosophy, and absolute culture. A beautiful, elegant world that had been brutally destroyed by the bloody chaos of the French Revolution. Ludwig wanted to resurrect that lost golden era of humanity, not in the crowded, noisy heart of France, but on a silent, forgotten island in the middle of a quiet Bavarian lake. He purchased the entire island of Herreninsel in the late summer of 1873, preventing local logging companies from cutting down the ancient, majestic forests that had stood proudly there for centuries. For Ludwig, the preservation of the island's natural, untouched silence was just as important as the construction of the palace itself. He wanted the vast waters of Lake Chiemsee to act as a permanent, liquid wall, keeping the noisy, industrial 19th century completely away from his sacred dream. He wanted a barrier that no politician, no journalist, and no modern distraction could ever cross. The very first foundation stone of the Grand Palace was carefully laid in May of 1878. The logistics of the construction were even more staggering and complex than his previous castles. Every single piece of white limestone, every massive block of marble, every sheet of expensive mirror glass, and every single golden chandelier had to be hauled to the mainland, loaded onto large wooden barges, and rowed slowly and carefully across the deep lake to the isolated island. Hundreds of master craftsmen, expert stonecutters, brilliant painters, and artists lived on the island for years, working tirelessly beneath the shadows of the old oak trees to bring the king's grand vision into physical, tangible reality. Imagine the absolute silence of that forested island being slowly transformed by the rhythmic clink of metal chisels against heavy marble and the deep, low murmurs of workmen echoing through the morning mist. Ludwig watched over the construction with an almost frantic, protective intensity. He demanded absolute, uncompromising perfection in every single detail. He did not want a modern interpretation of Versailles. He wanted a flawless, literal resurrection. Every painted ceiling fresco, every carved golden door frame, and every single silk tapestry had to perfectly match the historical designs of 17th century France, crafted with a level of luxury that often surpassed even the original palace of Louis XIV. As you approach the grand facade of Chiemsee Palace through the dense, geometric grid of perfectly manicured formal gardens, the sheer, staggering scale of the building leaves you breathless. The exterior stretches out like a massive cliff of brilliant white stone and elegant glass, completely dominating the center of the isolated island. It stands tonight as a stunning, geometric monument of human artifice placed in the absolute center of wild, untamed, and ancient Bavarian nature. Step slowly through the grand, echoing entrance hall of the palace, and your eyes are instantly transported out of Germany and into a world of pure French opulence and royal grandeur. The air inside the palace is remarkably cool, perfectly still, and heavy with silence, carrying the faint, aristocratic scent of fine marble dust, expensive gold leaf, and old beeswax candles. The massive walls are lined with grand panels of deep green and red marble brought from Italy, beautifully adorned with grand bronze sculptures, classical columns, and vast, sweeping frescoes that depict classical gods, ancient triumphs, and the celestial glory of the sun. King Ludwig designed the grand interior of Chiemsee to be experienced completely alone, specifically beneath the soft, flickering light of the moon and candles. He would arrive on the island secretly at midnight, stepping off his private royal steamship into the dark, whispering forests. He would walk up the grand marble staircases completely alone, his slow footsteps echoing softly through the vast, empty stone halls. There were no courtiers waiting to greet him, no royal family members, and no outside guests. The palace was an immense, brilliant desert of gold and marble, built entirely for the psychological comfort of one solitary king. The absolute heart of the palace contains the state bedchamber, a room of such unbelievable, staggering luxury that it completely defies description. The massive bed sits on a raised platform, surrounded by heavily carved golden railings and draped in over 100 pounds of deep, rich crimson velvet, entirely covered in hand-embroidered gold thread that took local needleworkers years of continuous labor to complete. This room was never built for actual sleeping. It was built as a sacred altar to the concept of absolute royalty and divine art. Ludwig would stand completely alone in the center of this empty, glowing room at 3 o'clock in the morning, surrounded by the silent ghosts of history, finding a deep comfort in the absolute grandeur of an era he could never truly touch in reality. Now, let us step together into the true masterpiece of Chiemsee Palace, the magnificent, breathtaking Hall of Mirrors. It is an exact replica of the famous room in Versailles, but Ludwig, in his endless pursuit of absolute perfection, built his version to be significantly larger than the French original. The hall stretches out for an incredible 320 feet, running continuously along the entire garden front of the palace. One side of the hall features 17 massive, arched windows looking out over the misty lake gardens, while the opposite wall is covered entirely in 17 identical arched mirrors, each composed of hundreds of individual sheets of flawless, polished glass. When Ludwig walked through this grand hall at midnight, the royal servants were strictly ordered to light more than 2,000 fine candles placed upon 33 massive crystal chandeliers and 44 elegant golden candelabras that lined the walls. The visual effect was nothing short of a cosmic, magical illusion. Because the massive mirrors perfectly reflected the windows in each other, the warm light of the 2,000 candles was multiplied into an infinite, glowing ocean of golden fire that seemed to stretch out into the eternal darkness of space. Imagine standing completely alone in the absolute center of this massive hall at 2 o'clock in the morning. The heat from the thousands of flickering candles creates a warm, gentle breeze that moves softly through the vast space, rustling the crystal drops. Everywhere you turn your head, you see an endless, shimmering progression of golden arches, flickering flames, and silent, glowing hallways extending into the deep fabric of infinity. The physical weight of the stone walls completely disappears from your senses, replaced entirely by a limitless, dreamlike universe of pure light, gold, and reflection. For Ludwig, the Hall of Mirrors was a profound emotional and spiritual sanctuary. In the political reality of Munich, his royal power was being systematically stripped away by modern constitutional laws, greedy politicians, and changing times. But inside this immense hall of light, his kingdom was infinite, absolute, and completely untouchable. He would walk slowly down the polished wood parquet floors, his long black velvet cloak sweeping silently behind him, watching the endless reflections of his own solitary figure passing through the sea of golden fire. In this room, he was not a compromised, lonely constitutional monarch. He was the undisputed emperor of dreams, ruling over a silent, beautiful universe that belonged entirely to his imagination. Outside the white stone walls of the palace, the formal fountains and grand water gardens stretch out beautifully toward the dark shore of the lake, built with the same dramatic, mathematical precision as the interior rooms. 2 massive marble fountain basins sit in the center of the main lawn, featuring colossal bronze sculptures of the ancient Greek titan Latona and various mystical sea creatures twisting in the stone. During the quiet nights, a powerful steam-powered pumping station hidden discreetly on the edge of the island would force water through a massive network of heavy iron pipes, causing the fountains to erupt into grand jets of water that reached high into the dark, starry sky. The sound of these fountains was a constant, soothing soundtrack to Ludwig's island visits, a deep, roaring, and rhythmic rush of water that perfectly drowned out the lonely whispers of the surrounding oak forests and the distant, stressful worries of the human world. Imagine walking along the gravel pathways of these grand gardens on a cold, crisp autumn night. The air is incredibly fresh and clean, carrying the natural scent of damp earth, fallen leaves, and the vast water of Lake Chiemsee. The full moon hangs low and silver over the lake, casting a pale, ethereal glow over the white marble statues and the rushing plumes of the fountains. Ludwig would wander these geometric paths for hours at a time, listening intently to the water hitting the marble basins, finding in the structured beauty of the gardens an absolute sense of order and peace that he could never find in the messy, chaotic world of human relationships. Yet, despite the incredible beauty and immense wealth poured into Chiemsee, the palace carries a deep, underlying sense of romantic tragedy. It was a dream that was simply too large and too grand for reality to sustain. By 1885, the king's personal financial resources were completely exhausted, and the massive construction came to a sudden, grinding halt. Of the palace's 70 grand rooms, only 20 were fully completed. The entire north and south wings of the structure were left as empty, raw brick shells, silent, echoing caverns of bare stone standing in stark contrast to the blinding gold of the completed apartments. King Ludwig only lived to stay at Chiemsee Palace for a total of 9 nights in his entire life, occupying his completed rooms in September of 1885. During those few short nights, he lived as a total hermit on his isolated island, surrounded by an immense desert of unfinished brick and completed gold. He knew with a heavy, melancholy heart that his grandest dream would never be fully finished, that the practical world outside was closing in on him, and that his time in his sacred sanctuaries was rapidly drawing to a final close. Yet, those 9 nights must have possessed a magical, unforgettable quality for the lonely king. High within his completed hall of mirrors, beneath the glowing fire of 2,000 candles, he had successfully created a world where time stood completely still. For a brief, beautiful moment in human history, he had carved an absolute sanctuary out of a wild Bavarian island, a place where the modern industrial world was completely banished by the sheer power of art, architecture, and imagination. Now, let the grand images of Chiemsee slowly and softly fade into the quiet, peaceful stillness of a midnight lake winter. The massive steam pumps have been shut down for the season, and the grand bronze fountains are completely silent tonight, their stone basins covered in a thick, protective layer of smooth, glassy ice. The formal gardens are buried beneath a heavy, silent blanket of pure white snow, and the ancient oak trees of the island stand like dark, frozen statues against the pale silver light of the winter moon. Inside the grand palace, the 2,000 candles have long since burned down into cold, silent wax. The infinite reflections in the hall of mirrors grow dark and deep, stretching out into peaceful, velvety shadows that fill the massive, empty space. The unfinished brick wings stand completely quiet, echoing only with the soft, faint sigh of the winter wind moving through the unglazed window frames. The entire island of Herreninsel is wrapped tonight in a profound, heavy silence, a quiet so deep that you can easily hear the soft rustle of the frost settling upon the pine branches. In this vast, silent island palace, King Ludwig's spirit found its most absolute and grand escape from the world of men. Chiemsee stands tonight not as a monument of royal madness or unbridled greed, but as a beautiful, heartbreaking, and eternal testament to the incredible lengths a human soul will go to build a sanctuary of pure beauty in a world that so often forgets to dream. Let your mind rest completely upon the quiet shores of this misty island, safe from the noise of the world, wrapped forever in the eternal silver and gold of a beautiful, unchanging dream. Welcome back, quiet traveler. As the dark, velvety blanket of the late night hours grows thicker, and the silver stars overhead shift into their quiet, midnight patterns, we step once more into the deeply protected, mysterious realm of 19th century Bavaria. Allow the heavy anchors of your daily responsibilities to lift away completely. Let your consciousness float gently, like a leaf drifting down a calm, dark river, carried entirely by the slow, soothing rhythm of my words. Tonight, we leave behind the vast marble halls of Chiemsee and the mechanical wonders of Linderhof Palace. Instead, we follow King Ludwig II out into the untamed, freezing darkness of the Alpine winters. We step into the freezing mountain air where the silver snow glistens beneath the full moon, and where the lonely king embarked on his legendary midnight rides, hiding his deepest secrets within the pages of a private diary that no ordinary man was ever intended to see. Imagine standing on a narrow, snow-covered mountain pass high in the Bavarian Alps at 2 o'clock in the morning. The silence of the forest is immense, freezing, and heavy, broken only by the sharp, metallic snap of frost settling on the pine branches. The world below is completely asleep, buried under a thick, silent blanket of pure white snow. Suddenly, from the deep shadows of the twisting mountain path, a faint, magical sound echoes through the frosty air. The rhythmic, musical jingling of hundreds of tiny silver bells. A warm, golden glow begins to flicker against the dark green trees as a magnificent, heavily gilded winter carriage, shaped like a royal shell, bursts into the clearing, pulled by 4 powerful white horses throwing mist from their breath. Inside sits the Swan King, wrapped in heavy furs, moving like a ghost through his frozen empire of shadow and snow. Take a deep, slow, and deeply relaxing breath of the crisp, freezing mountain air. Feel the absolute stillness of this winter wilderness settling into your thoughts. In this high, frozen world, the loud, critical judgments of human society are miles away, completely erased by the vast, silent snowbanks. There are no political newspapers here, no demanding state ministers, and no royal expectations to crush your spirit. There is only the rhythmic beat of horses' hooves on the soft snow, the soft chiming of silver bells, the cold winter wind, and the profound, unbreakable comfort of absolute nocturnal isolation. As we step into the magical, shadow-filled world of Ludwig's midnight travels and listen to the quiet, private thoughts written in his secret papers tonight, let your mind rest completely. Settle down into the calm, luxurious depth of this late-night historical narrative and feel the deep peace of a king who found his only true freedom in the darkness of the mountain night. To fully and deeply understand the unique lifestyle of King Ludwig II, one must explore his absolute rejection of the daytime world. As the political pressures in the capital city of Munich intensified, the king felt a profound, physical sickness toward the bright hours of the day. To his sensitive, artistic soul, the daylight represented exposure, judgment, and the harsh, unpoetic reality of a modern industrial society he deeply despised. In an act of radical psychological defense, Ludwig decided to completely reverse his existence. He systematically transformed his life into a nocturnal fairy tale, turning the dark, silent night into his actual daytime. He would sleep deeply behind thick, heavy velvet curtains from dawn until twilight, completely shutting out the bright rays of the German sun. Then, just as the sun dipped below the jagged mountain peaks and the first silver stars began to blink into existence, the king would wake up, dress in his finest royal garments, and begin his day. His breakfast was served at midnight, his lunch was eaten beneath the stars at 3 o'clock in the morning, and his royal walks were taken along paths illuminated entirely by the pale, soft glow of oil lanterns and the silver moon. This nocturnal lifestyle was not a simple whim. It was a beautifully constructed shield that allowed the king to maintain the illusion of absolute freedom. In the darkness of the night, the complex constitutional laws of Bavaria were completely invisible. The demanding politicians of Munich were asleep in their city beds, and the entire kingdom belonged entirely to the king's imagination. He was no longer a limited, modern monarch bound by government budgets. He was a majestic sovereign of shadows, ruling over a silent, beautiful kingdom of snow, mountains, and ancient trees. His midnight winter rides became the ultimate expression of this secret existence. Ludwig commissioned his royal craftsmen to build an array of incredibly elaborate, theatrical sleighs and carriages that looked like they had stepped directly out of an 18th century fairy tale. These sleighs were heavily covered in pure gold leaf, adorned with intricate sculptures of mythical sea gods, cherubs, and graceful swans, and lined with the softest, deepest blue and crimson silk velvet. Most extraordinary of all, these royal carriages were equipped with early technological innovations, including hidden, battery-powered electrical lamps that illuminated the inside of the carriage with a soft, magical glow, making the king appear to float through the dark forests like a celestial being. Imagine the pure, stunning surrealism of those midnight journeys for the simple, hard-working mountain peasants who lived in the isolated alpine valleys. A woodcutter or a simple farmer, waking up in the middle of a freezing winter night to check on his cattle, would look out of his small cabin window into the absolute darkness of the pine forest. Suddenly, the deep silence of the mountain would be broken by the fast-moving, rhythmic chime of silver bells ringing through the frost. Through the thick, snow-covered trees, a bright, golden light would appear, casting long, dancing shadows across the white landscape. Before the peasants' eyes, the king's magnificent gilded sleigh would fly past, the 4 massive white horses kicking up plumes of silver snow, their breath freezing instantly in the crisp air. Inside the glowing shell of the carriage, the tall, handsome king would be seen for a fleeting, magical second, wrapped in rich sable furs, staring out at the wilderness with a distant, deeply melancholic gaze. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the golden light would fade into the dark trees. The musical chiming of the silver bells would grow faint and distant, and the profound, heavy silence of the mountain would close back over the snowy path. It was an experience so beautiful, so otherworldly, that the peasants would often wonder if they had been dreaming, if they had witnessed a ghost or a winter spirit passing through the valley. Yet, despite his extreme isolation, these midnight rides created a deep, unbreakable bond of love and loyalty between King Ludwig and the simple mountain people of Bavaria. Unlike the cynical, power-hungry politicians in the capital city of Munich, the mountain peasants did not judge the king for his eccentricities or his massive building projects. They saw him as a kind, mythical protector who belonged to the mountains themselves. Ludwig would often stop his midnight sleigh at isolated cabins or small mountain inns, stepping inside to escape a sudden winter storm. He would sit by their warm log fires, speak softly with the humble families, and listen to their simple stories with genuine interest and respect. The king was incredibly generous to these isolated mountain people. Before leaving their humble cabins to return into the freezing night, he would secretly leave heavy gold coins on their wooden tables, or give them expensive royal jewelry and fine silks, asking only for their discretion, their loyalty, and their absolute protection from the prying eyes of the city journalists. The peasants kept his secrets faithfully. To them, he was the Unserkini, our king, a magical figure of pure benevolence who brought a touch of golden romance into their harsh, difficult lives in the snow. But while the outside world saw a magnificent king flying through the night in a golden carriage, the inner reality of Ludwig's mind was filled with a deep, agonizing loneliness. The true nature of his internal thoughts, his intense psychological struggles, and his profound isolation were carefully hidden from the world, recorded only within the highly private pages of his secret diaries and personal notebooks. These papers, written by his own hand under the soft glow of candlelight at 3 o'clock in the morning, reveal a soul locked in a constant, heartbreaking battle with its own humanity. Ludwig was a deeply religious, sensitive man, raised with strict traditional values and an absolute belief in the divine nature of his royal crown. Yet, his deeply romantic, artistic soul was filled with intense, sweeping passions, unconventional longings, and artistic visions that he felt he could never reveal to the rigid, conservative, and judgmental society of 19th century Europe. He felt completely trapped between the heavy expectations of his public office and the secret reality of his true self. In his secret diary entries, written across decades of isolation, the king's handwriting often shifts from elegant, sweeping script to frantic, heavily underlined words of deep prayer and emotional distress. He would constantly beg God for the strength to overcome his deep loneliness, to purify his thoughts, and to find a sense of peace that seemed to permanently elude him in the waking world. He wrote of his palaces not as displays of wealth, but as desperate, architectural prayers, attempts to build a physical heaven on earth where his weary soul could finally hide from the critical eyes of his ministers and family. As the long years rolled by and the construction debts of his massive fairy tale castles began to catch up with him, the king's diary entries grew increasingly detached from the practical world of politics. He began to live almost entirely within a constructed historical universe of his own making. He would write long, passionate letters to the dead historical figures he admired, including the French Queen Marie Antoinette and King Louis XIV, treating them as his true, living friends and companions, while completely ignoring the living ministers who knocked desperately on his palace doors. He found the company of these historical ghosts far more comforting than the presence of living men. The dead did not demand political signatures, they did not argue about government budgets, and they did not look at him with calculating, judgmental eyes. In his private thoughts, Ludwig was systematically building an alternative reality, a sacred world of pure art, absolute honor, and eternal beauty that existed entirely outside the boundaries of historical time. Imagine the king sitting at a massive writing desk inside the private library of Linderhof Palace at 4 in the morning. A single candle burns low, its flame dancing softly in the cool mountain breeze that leaks through the window. The room is surrounded by thousands of leather-bound books filled with the poetry, myths, and legends of a bygone era. Ludwig leans over the paper, his long fingers holding a silver quill pen, his face illuminated by the soft, warm light. He writes down his deepest, most secret longings, his tears dropping softly onto the ink, blurring the letters into beautiful, tragic patterns of sorrow. He knew with absolute certainty that his time was running out, that the practical, industrial world he so deeply hated was slowly closing its iron jaws around his dream world. The politicians in Munich were openly conspiring against him, using his massive construction debts and his nocturnal lifestyle as an excuse to declare him mentally unfit to rule. But Ludwig did not care about their political games. He cared only about his dreams. He continued to write, to build, and to ride through the dark forests, pouring the remaining energy of his life into protecting his inner light from being extinguished by the cold winds of reality. Now, Let the vivid images of the golden winter sleigh and the frantic handwriting slowly and softly fade into the quiet, peaceful stillness of a midnight mountain freeze. The fast-moving white horses have been led back to their warm stables, and the magnificent gilded carriage sits quiet and dark within the royal coach-house, its golden sculptures catching the faint, distant reflection of the winter stars. The silver bells are perfectly still, their musical chiming replaced by the deep, heavy silence of the alpine night. High on the mountain passes, the deep tracks left by the heavy sleigh wheels are slowly, steadily filled in by a gentle, continuous fall of fresh, powdery white snow. Within an hour, every trace of the king's midnight journey is completely erased from the earth, leaving the mountain paths looking perfectly untouched, pristine, and perfectly quiet beneath the pale light of the moon. The dense pine trees stand like silent, frozen guardians, protecting the secrets of the valley from the noisy world outside. Inside the dark library, the silver quill pen has been laid down, and the candle has burned down to a small, quiet pool of cold wax. The secret diary sits closed on the heavy desk, its deeply private pages holding the unspoken sorrows and grand dreams of a lonely king who preferred the silent darkness of the night to the harsh, unpoetic reality of the day. The entire landscape of Bavaria is wrapped tonight in a profound, healing silence, a quiet so deep that you can hear the soft, rhythmic rustle of the frost settling upon the sleeping earth. In this dark, frozen wilderness, King Ludwig found the only true moments of absolute freedom and peace he would ever experience in his difficult life. The memory of his midnight ride stands tonight, not as a symbol of madness or royal eccentricity, but as a beautiful, deeply moving testament to the incredible lengths a human soul will go to escape the cages of society and find its own unique path to serenity. Let your mind rest completely upon these quiet, snow-covered mountains, safe from the noise of the world, wrapped forever in the deep silver and protective shadows of a beautiful, unchanging dream. Quiet traveler, as the deep, velvety shadows of the late-night hours stretch into their final, most peaceful patterns, we step together into the poignant, bittersweet closing chapters of 19th century Bavaria. Allow the remaining thoughts of your waking day to dissolve completely, like soft mist vanishing over a silent mountain ridge. Let your breathing slow down to a perfectly steady, effortless rhythm, matching the ancient, unchanging whisper of the alpine trees outside. Tonight, we journey into the quiet twilight of King Ludwig II's extraordinary life. We step into the autumn of his beautiful, isolated universe, where the heavy clouds of human reality finally began to collide with his eternal empire of dreams. Yet, even in the shadows of his final days, we find a profound, unbreakable serenity, a quiet sanctuary of the spirit that no political conspiracy could ever truly touch or destroy. Imagine standing on the high, wooden balcony of Neuschwanstein Castle at 4 o'clock in the morning. The air is intensely cold, crisp, and heavy with the scent of damp pine needles and oncoming winter rain. Below you, the vast, dark valleys of Füssen are completely buried beneath a thick sea of silver-blue fog, obscuring the houses of ordinary men from your sight. The jagged, towering peaks of the Alps rise like silent, stony giants all around, their snow-covered ridges catching the pale, ethereal glow of a setting crescent moon. There is no sound in this high sanctuary except the deep, low sigh of the mountain wind moving through the white stone towers. It is a place of heartbreaking beauty, a fortress of pure imagination standing proudly at the very edge of the world. Take a slow, deep, and deeply comforting breath of this fresh, cold mountain air. Feel the absolute stillness of this high sanctuary washing over your thoughts, clearing away the heavy dust of everyday life. In this elevated space, you are completely elevated above the chaotic noise, the petty arguments, and the stressful demands of modern human civilization. There are no political newspapers here, no aggressive state ministers, and no exhausting social expectations to weigh down your heart. There is only the vast sky, the dark forests, the frozen stone, and the profound, healing comfort of absolute, protective isolation. As we walk softly through the final, shadowed days of the Swan King's life and explore the quiet twilight of his magnificent architectural creations tonight, let your mind become perfectly still. Sink into the calm, luxurious depths of this historical narrative and find a deep, lasting peace in the realization that a beautiful dream, once created, can never truly be erased from the fabric of the universe. To fully and deeply understand the twilight era of King Ludwig's reign, we must look at the closing trapdoor of history. By the year 1886, the king had completely withdrawn from the physical city of Munich, refusing to return to the capital for months at a time. He lived entirely as a royal ghost, shifting silently between the finished rooms of Linderhof, the massive golden halls of Chiemsee, and the soaring towers of Neuschwanstein. His personal financial debts, brought on by his relentless, uncompromising building projects, had reached an astronomical scale. Yet, to Ludwig's deeply romantic, artistic mind, these debts were entirely irrelevant. He did not view his palaces as financial liabilities or material assets. To him, they were sacred, physical manifestations of pure art, monuments built to save the human soul from the ugly, industrial materialism of the 19th century. However, the politicians and state ministers in Munich operated in a completely different world, a world of dry numbers, political power, and cold, calculating practicality. They saw the king's complete refusal to engage in state bureaucracy, his nocturnal lifestyle, and his endless expenditures on stone and gold as a direct threat to the stability of the Bavarian government. Led by the ambitious Prime Minister Johann von Lutz, a secret and systematic conspiracy was formed behind closed doors. The ministers knew they could not legally depose the king simply for spending his own royal funds or for preferring the night to the day. Therefore, they decided to weaponize the emerging, primitive field of psychiatry against him. In a dark, calculated move, the government commissioned a panel of 4 state doctors, led by the prominent psychiatrist Dr. Bernhard von Gudden, to produce a medical report declaring the king mentally unfit to rule his kingdom. Shockingly, none of these 4 doctors ever physically examined King Ludwig, nor did they ever speak a single word to him before writing their final diagnosis. Instead, they relied entirely on gossiping statements gathered from disgruntled servants, political enemies, and exaggerated accounts of his eccentric midnight carriage rides through the mountain snow. On June 8, 1886, the medical commission finalized their report, declaring King Ludwig permanently insane and incapable of managing his royal duties. To the conspirators, it was a clean, legal victory that would allow them to place the king's uncle, Prince Luitpold, in power as regent. But to history, it stands as a deeply moving, tragic testament to how a cold, unpoetic society treats a sensitive artist who refuses to conform to its rigid, unimaginative rules. Imagine the profound, crushing sorrow inside the walls of Neuschwanstein Castle when the news of this political betrayal finally reached the lonely king. On the night of June 9th, a government commission arrived at the base of the mountain cliff, carrying the official papers of deposition. But the local mountain peasants, hearing of the threat to their beloved Unserkini, rushed down from their alpine cabins, forming a thick, protective human wall around the castle gates with their wooden axes and pitchforks. The local fire brigade and trusted royal guards arrested the government commissioners, keeping the king safe within his high stone towers for a few more precious hours. During those final, intense nights at Neuschwanstein, Ludwig walked slowly through his unfinished palace, his footsteps echoing softly through the vast, empty brick corridors. He spent hours standing in the magnificent, gold-leafed Singers' Hall, beneath the beautiful frescoes of the Holy Grail, looking out of the high glass windows at the dark Bavarian lakes far below. He knew with absolute certainty that his beautiful, protective dream world was being brutally shattered by the outside world. He reportedly looked out into the dark night and stated, "If they take me away from these rocks, how can I live?" Yet, even in this moment of supreme psychological crisis, the king refused to allow violence to be shed in his name. When his loyal supporters urged him to march on Munich with the local Alpine regiments, Ludwig softly declined, choosing instead to accept his tragic fate with a dignity and grace that surprised his enemies. On the morning of June 12th, a second, more powerful government commission arrived. The king was quietly taken into custody inside his bedroom, led down the long, winding mountain paths he loved so dearly, and transported under heavy guard to Castle Berg, a small, isolated royal residence sitting on the dark shores of Lake Starnberg. Take a deep, slow pause here, and let the sheer, peaceful stillness of Lake Starnberg surround your mind. Imagine the scene on the evening of June 13th, 1886, the final night of the king's earthly journey. A heavy, warm summer rain is falling softly over the vast lake, creating a gentle, rhythmic patter against the green leaves of the surrounding beech trees. The water is as smooth, dark, and flat as a sheet of polished obsidian marble, completely undisturbed by the chaos of human history. At around 6:30 in the evening, King Ludwig asked Dr. Bernhard von Gudden to accompany him on a quiet walk along the silent, wooded shoreline of the lake. The doctor, believing the king was completely calm and submissive, ordered the royal guards to stay far behind, leaving the two men entirely alone in the misty evening air. They walked into the deep shadows of the trees, their figures slowly disappearing into the gray, enveloping summer mist that rolled off the dark water. What happened next in the deep shadows of that lakeside forest remains one of the most haunting, deeply beautiful, and permanent mysteries in European history. When the two men failed to return by 8 o'clock, a frantic, massive search was launched by the royal guards across the entire estate. Hundreds of oil lanterns flickered through the dark woods, their warm light casting long, dancing shadows across the wet trees, their voices echoing desperately through the rain. Finally, at around 11 o'clock that night, a searcher noticed something floating near the shallow water close to the shore. The searchers rushed into the cold lake, and there, beneath the soft, pale light of the lanterns, they discovered the bodies of both King Ludwig and Dr. von Gudden, floating face down in the still, dark water of Lake Starnberg. The king's silver pocket watch had stopped permanently at exactly 6 minutes past 8 o'clock, the precise moment when the Swan King finally escaped the heavy, painful cages of his earthly existence and stepped into the absolute, unbreakable freedom of eternity. The government quickly declared his death a suicide by drowning, but the physical evidence immediately contradicted their dry narrative. The water where the king was found was less than waist deep, and no water was ever found in his lungs during the medical examination. Many believed then, and still believe today, that Ludwig was shot by political assassins while attempting to escape across the lake to a waiting carriage, choosing death over a lifetime of imprisonment in a cold asylum. But to those who love his memory, the physical cause of his death matters very little. The true reality is that the Moon King did not drown. He simply chose to dissolve into the mist, leaving his physical body behind to return to the beautiful, mystical world of shadows from which he had originally come. Following his tragic departure from the earth, the politicians in Munich immediately ordered all construction work on his unfinished palaces to cease permanently. The thousands of master craftsmen, stonecutters, and artists were sent away from the mountains, leaving the massive brick walls of Neuschwanstein and Chiemsee completely silent and empty. The government intended to sell the castles for scrap or leave them to rot in the wilderness, viewing them as useless monuments of a madman's greed. But history possesses a beautiful, poetic way of delivering absolute justice. Within weeks of the king's death, the Bavarian government realized they could make money by opening the palaces to the public as museums. The very people who had criticized Ludwig for spending public funds rushed by the millions to catch a glimpse of his extraordinary imagination. Today, the 3 fairy tale palaces he built have brought billions of dollars in tourism revenue to the state of Bavaria, successfully paying off his historical debts thousands of times over, and standing as the most famous, beloved symbols of Germany throughout the world. Now, let the grand, tragic images of Lake Starnberg and the political conspiracies fade softly and completely into the quiet, healing stillness of a timeless winter night. The great stone walls of Neuschwanstein Castle are wrapped tonight in a profound, unbroken silence, their high white towers dusted in a soft, heavy blanket of pure white snow that glistens beneath the full moon. The empty brick corridors, where the workmen once murmured, are completely quiet, echoing only with the soft, soothing sigh of the alpine wind moving through the high cliffs. Down in the narrow valley of Linderhof, the golden fountains are completely frozen into beautiful, glassy ice sculptures, and the ancient lime trees stand like dark, silent sentinels protecting the memory of their king. High in the mysterious Venus grotto, the emerald water of the underground lake is perfectly flat, still, and calm, reflecting the deep, velvety shadows of the cave. The golden conch shellboat sits perfectly secure at its stone dock, waiting silently for a master who has stepped beyond the boundaries of time. And out in the center of the vast lake Chiemsee, the grand island palace of Chiemsee sits wrapped in a thick, protective blanket of silver winter mist. The 2,000 candles inside the Hall of Mirrors have long since burned out, leaving the infinite reflections to stretch out into the peaceful, comforting darkness of space. The entire kingdom of Bavaria is wrapped tonight in a deep, absolute, and healing silence. A quiet so profound that it safely envelopes your thoughts, easing your mind into a state of total, undisturbed rest. King Ludwig II of Bavaria lived his life as a tragic poet of stone and gold, a beautiful soul who refused to let his internal light be extinguished by the gray, unpoetic reality of the world. His palaces stand tonight not as monuments of madness, but as eternal, heartbreaking, and breathtaking testaments to the incredible, limitless power of the human imagination. They are physical proof that beauty can survive the storms of history, and that a sanctuary built within the mind can never truly be conquered by the noise of the world. As the pale silver light of the winter moon washes over the frozen lakes and the high alpine towers tonight, let your mind rest completely upon the quiet shores of his memory. You are perfectly safe here, completely insulated from the stress of the world, wrapped securely in the eternal velvet, gold, and shadow of a beautiful, unchanging dream. Let yourself drift away now into the deep, dark water of a peaceful sleep, knowing that your dreams, too, are an absolute sanctuary that belongs entirely to you. Sleep now, quiet traveler, sleep deeply, and let the beautiful King of Dreams guard your journey through the night. Quiet traveler, to the final and most peaceful sanctuary of our long historical journey. The deep indigo velvet of the midnight sky has now stretched to its absolute limit, blanketed by an infinite sea of soft, shimmering stars that look down upon the world with ancient comfort. Allow your physical body to sink completely into the absolute safety of your bed. Release the very last remnants of daytime tension from your shoulders, your hands, and your mind. Let your breath become as effortless, slow, and deep as the rhythmic swaying of old pine trees in a gentle night breeze. Tonight, we step beyond the physical timeline of King Ludwig II's earthly life. We enter the realm of the eternal echo, the timeless, magical space where his presence is still deeply felt, where his castles have become shrines of global wonder, and where his romantic soul continues to guard the quiet gate between reality and beautiful, unchanging dreams. Imagine standing high above the Polet Gorge on the Marienbrück, the slender iron bridge that suspends itself miraculously between two massive, dark mountain cliffs. It is 2 o'clock in a quiet, crisp winter morning. The air is perfectly clean, sharp, and cold, carrying the faint, sweet scent of mountain snow and ancient stone. Below you, the rushing waterfall is frozen into giant, glowing crystal pipes that catch the silver light of a magnificent full moon. And there, standing proudly against the dark, rugged face of the mountain, is Neuschwanstein Castle, illuminated softly by the celestial light. It looks entirely weightless, like a brilliant white cloud that has gently rested upon the rocks for eternity. There are no crowds of tourists here tonight, no cameras, and no loud voices. There is only the vast, deep silence of the alpine night, the pale moon, the cold stone towers, and the profound, healing comfort of absolute, eternal isolation. Take a deep, slow, and deeply calming breath of this pure, freezing mountain air. Feel its refreshing clarity washing through your mind, sweeping away the heavy dust of your daily thoughts. In this high, timeless sanctuary, the ticking of the clock holds no power over you. The fast-paced, noisy, and stressful demands of the modern 21st century cannot reach this elevation. They are completely blocked out by the massive, snowy walls of the mountains. There are no economic reports to read here, no digital notifications to answer, and no social roles to play. There is only the immense sky, the dark winter forests, the glowing white towers, and the deep, protective embrace of a dream that will never die. As we wander through the magical legacy, the artistic immortality, and the silent nighttime presence of the Swan King tonight, let your conscious mind completely let go. Settle deeply into the luxurious, velvet cushions of this final historical dream, and feel the absolute, lasting peace of a sanctuary that exists purely to protect the beauty of the human soul. To truly understand the immortality of King Ludwig II, one must look at what happened to the world after he departed the shores of Lake Starnberg. The practical politicians in Munich, who had worked so systematically to destroy his reputation, truly believed that the king's story was completely finished. They thought that by locking away his private diaries, halting the construction of his grand palaces, and declaring him a tragic madman, they could return Bavaria to a world of dry bureaucracy, cold industrialism, and unpoetic reality. They viewed his spectacular white towers and golden halls as embarrassing monuments to human waste, expensive mistakes built by a broken mind that would soon be forgotten by the passage of time. But the human spirit operates on a completely different laws than those of political offices. The common people of Bavaria, the woodcutters, the mountain peasants, and the simple citizens who had witnessed his golden carriages flying through the winter snow, refused to let his memory fade into the gray shadows of history. They began to tell stories around their winter fires, transforming the real king into a mythical figure of pure romance. He became the legendary Swan King, a mythical monarch who had descended from the high heavens to build a physical paradise of art and beauty on earth, only to be stolen away by a cold, unimaginative world that was simply not ready for his light. Within a few short weeks of his death, an extraordinary paradox began to unfold. The Bavarian government, desperately needing to pay off the remaining construction debts of the royal estates, reluctantly decided to open the heavy gates of Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, and Chiemsee to the public. They charged a small fee for admission, expecting only a few curious historians or artistic eccentrics to visit the empty rooms. But to their absolute, staggering amazement, a massive wave of human beings from all corners of the globe began to journey toward the Bavarian mountains. People did not come to mock the mad king as the politicians had hoped. Instead, they came to stand in absolute awe of his immense vision. They stepped into the grand hall of mirrors at Linderhof and wept at the infinite beauty of the candlelit reflections. They walked through the unfinished brick wings of Chiemsee and felt a deep, profound connection to the romantic tragedy of an unfulfilled dream. And when they looked up at the soaring white towers of Neuschwanstein, standing in perfect harmony with the rugged mountain cliffs, they realized that this was not the creation of a broken mind, but the ultimate masterpiece of an absolute artistic genius who had successfully carved his soul into the very stone of the earth. As the decades marched forward into the 20th century, the world outside the Bavarian valleys underwent cataclysmic changes. The industrial era that Ludwig so deeply hated accelerated into a time of massive machinery, crowded concrete cities, and devastating world wars. The old monarchies of Europe systematically fell. The grand royal courts vanished from existence, and the unpoetic materialism of the modern age completely dominated the planet. Yet, throughout all of this global chaos, Ludwig's secret palaces remained completely untouched, sitting high in their quiet valleys like sacred time capsules of pure beauty and romance. They became essential sanctuaries for the human imagination. In a world that was becoming increasingly standardized, cold, and practical, the white towers of Neuschwanstein served as a permanent physical reminder that humanity still possessed the divine capacity to dream. The castles began to influence global culture in ways that the lonely king could have never possibly imagined. Writers, poets, and artists from all over the world journeyed to these valleys to draw inspiration from his architecture. The most famous manifestation of this global influence occurred in the middle of the 20th century, when an American visionary named Walt Disney visited Neuschwanstein Castle. He was so deeply moved, spellbound, and transformed by the romantic majesty of the white towers rising above the misty forests that he used it as the direct, primary architectural blueprint for the iconic Sleeping Beauty castle at the heart of his theme parks. Through this creative adaptation, Ludwig's private sanctuary of personal isolation was transformed into the universal, global symbol of childhood magic, hope, and imagination for hundreds of millions of human beings across the face of the earth. Think about the beautiful, poetic irony of this historical truth. The dry, practical politicians who had sought to destroy him are completely forgotten today, their names buried in dusty archive boxes that no one ever opens. But the mad king, who wished to disappear completely from the face of the earth, has become one of the most beloved, recognized, and influential architects in human history. His personal sanctuaries have brought billions of dollars in economic prosperity to the people of Bavaria, paying off his historical debts millions of times over. He did not build his castles for political power or vanity. He built them for the preservation of pure beauty, and because his motives were pure, his creation has achieved an absolute, unbreakable immortality. Now, let us imagine stepping back into these magnificent spaces during the deep, quiet hours of a contemporary winter night. Long after the last tour groups have gone home, the gift shops have closed, and the massive security gates have been locked tight for the season. The modern world completely retreats from the valleys, and the castles return once more to their original, natural state. Silent, majestic palaces of shadow, silver moonlight, and private memories, waiting for the return of their nocturnal master. Step softly into the grand hall of mirrors inside her Chiemsee Palace at 3 o'clock in the morning. The space is completely dark, yet it is filled with a deep, liquid tranquility. The 17 massive arched windows look out over the frozen lake gardens, catching the pale, ethereal light of the stars. As your eyes adjust to the beautiful darkness, the 17 identical mirrors on the opposite wall begin to reflect that celestial starlight back and forth, infinitely, creating a silent, shimmering galaxy of silver points that seems to stretch out into the very center of eternity. The air inside the vast hall is remarkably cool, still, and heavy with peace. There are no footsteps here tonight, no whispering crowds, and no modern distractions. There is only an absolute, unbroken stillness that allows your mind to expand into a state of total serenity. You can feel the profound, emotional weight of Ludwig's original vision completely surrounding you. In this room, time does not move in a straight line. It stands perfectly still. The boundaries between the past, the present, and the future completely dissolve into the soft velvet shadows, leaving you wrapped in a timeless universe of pure light and reflection. Now, let your consciousness float away from the misty island of the lake, moving smoothly over the dark, sleeping forests, and travel back to the narrow valley of Linderhof Palace. Walk down the snow-covered gravel pathways of the geometric gardens beneath the frozen mountains. The great golden fountain is perfectly silent, its waters tucked away safely beneath the ice. High on the hillside, the beautiful classical temple of Venus stands like a silent white crown against the dark pine trees, catching the silver glow of the moon. As you approach the hidden entrance of the Venus Grotto, built deep into the solid limestone cliff face, the heavy silence of the mountain becomes even more profound. Inside the dark, artificial cavern, the emerald green waters of the underground lake are perfectly flat, smooth, and glassy, acting as a flawless mirror for the jagged plaster stalactites that hang from the ceiling. The golden conch shellboat rests completely still at its stone dock, its brilliant gold leaf glowing softly in the natural, pale light that filters through the rocks. There are no operatic singers echoing through the cavern tonight, no changing electrical lights of red or blue, and no mechanical waves moving the water. There is only a deep, subterranean peace, a quiet so pure and heavy that it acts as a soft, protective shield for your thoughts. Here, hundreds of feet beneath the heavy crust of the earth, your mind is completely insulated from any remaining anxieties of your waking life. You are wrapped in the timeless, protective embrace of a mountain sanctuary that was built specifically to keep the noise of the human world permanently away. Finally, let your spirit rise out of the deep cavern and float high up into the rugged cliffs of Füssen, returning to the majestic white towers of Neuschwanstein Castle. Step inside the magnificent, gold-leafed Singers' Hall at 4 o'clock in the morning. The massive space is beautifully illuminated by the silver light of the full moon streaming through the high, arched glass windows. The beautiful frescoes depicting the ancient legends of the Holy Grail and the mystical journeys of Parsifal look down from the walls with quiet, ancient wisdom. Imagine walking slowly down the highly polished parquet floors of this grand hall, completely alone in the midnight stillness. Your breath moves softly in the cool air, creating tiny mists that vanish into the dark timber ceilings. Everywhere you look, You see the intricate symbols of the swan, the beautiful emblem of purity, grace, and spiritual elevation. For Ludwig, this hall was the ultimate temple of his soul, a place where the heavy chains of his royal crown completely fell away, leaving him free to exist as a pure creature of art and imagination. As you stand in the absolute center of this magnificent, silent hall, look out of the high glass windows at the vast Bavarian landscape sleeping peacefully far below. The deep blue lakes of the Alpsee and the Chiemsee look like massive, polished sapphires resting in the snow, reflecting the infinite stars of the midnight sky. The dark pine forests stretch out for miles into the horizon, a vast, protective ocean of green and white that guards the base of your stone fortress. In this high, quiet space, you can finally hear the true, eternal echo of the Swan King's voice. It is not a voice of madness, sorrow, or tragedy. It is a gentle, warm, and deeply reassuring whisper that moves softly through the pine needles and the white stone arches. It is a whisper that tells you that it is perfectly safe to let go of the practical world, that it is necessary, beautiful, and right to protect your own internal sanctuary of dreams from the cold, unpoetic demands of your daily life. He built these magnificent structures not to trap his spirit in the past, but to create a permanent, physical refuge where the human soul could always return to find its own unique path to peace. Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, and Chiemsee stand tonight not as dead museums of history, but as living, breathing monuments to the immortality of the human imagination. They are absolute proof that a beautiful dream, when crafted with pure passion and love, can survive the collapse of empires, the chaos of wars, and the relentless march of time, remaining forever as a beacon of pure light in a world that so often forgets to look at the stars. Now, let the grand images of the white stone towers, the infinite golden mirrors, and the hidden green lakes slowly, steadily, and softly fade into the quiet, healing stillness of a midnight freeze. The entire landscape of Bavaria is wrapped tonight in a profound, heavy, and beautiful silence. A quiet so deep that it safely envelopes your thoughts, easing your mind into a state of total, undisturbed rest. The pale silver light of the winter moon continues to wash over the frozen lakes and the high alpine ridges, casting a soft, protective glow over the sleeping earth. Inside your own quiet room tonight, you are completely safe, perfectly insulated from the stress, noise, and chaos of the outside world. The heavy anchors of your daily life have been completely lifted away, leaving your consciousness free to float into the soft, velvet shadows of a deep and peaceful sleep. You do not have to worry about tomorrow. You do not have to carry the weights of yesterday, and you do not have to answer to the demands of the waking world. You are resting safely on the quiet shores of an eternal sanctuary that belongs entirely to you. Let yourself drift away now into the calm, dark, and beautiful water of a long, restoring sleep. Let your mind become as smooth and still as the winter surface of Lake Chiemsee beneath the silver mist. The Swan King has successfully built his palaces to protect the beauty of the dream, and tonight, those very palaces stand as guardians over your own journey through the quiet hours of the night. Sink down into the deep, luxurious comfort of the shadows, wrapped forever in the gold, silver, and velvet of a beautiful, unchanging dream. The story has been told. The towers are silent. The candles have burned down to cold wax, and the night is perfectly at peace. Sleep now, quiet traveler, sleep deeply, and let the magnificent King of Dreams guide your spirit safely until the morning light. Sleep, sleep, and drift away into the eternal peace of the night. Step softly into the grand hall of mirrors inside Linderhof Palace at 4 o'clock in the morning. The room is wrapped in a deep, luxurious, and liquid twilight. The massive, blue and white porcelain chandeliers hang perfectly still from the high, gilded ceilings, their unlit candles catching the pale, ethereal light of the stars that streams through the tall windows. The large, highly polished mirrors on the opposite walls catch that celestial light, reflecting it back and forth across the room into an infinite, shimmering pathway of silver dots that seems to stretch out past the very boundaries of space and time. The air inside the hall is remarkably cool, clean, and filled with a profound, healing peace. There are no footsteps here tonight, no modern whispers, and no historical burdens. There is only an absolute, unbroken quietude that allows your mind to expand into a state of total, weightless serenity. In this room, the ticking of the clock completely loses its meaning. The past, the present, and the future completely blend together into a single, beautiful moment of pure reflection. You can feel the quiet, protective spirit of the king completely surrounding you, welcoming you into his private sanctuary of light, and showing you that it is perfectly safe to let go of the chaotic world outside. Now, let your consciousness float gently away from the narrow valley of Linderhof, moving smoothly over the massive, snow-covered pine forests of the mountains, and travel back to the vast, misty waters of Lake Chiemsee. Walk down the immense, silent gravel avenues of the gardens of Chiemsee Palace beneath the midnight sky. The twin grand fountains, adorned with massive stone statues of mythical sea creatures, are completely silent tonight, their waters tucked away safely beneath a beautiful layer of clear, glassy ice that glistens like diamonds under the full moon. As you step inside the massive, unfinished wings of Chiemsee, the silence becomes even more monumental, deep, and protective. Walk into the vast, raw brick corridors where the master craftsmen once worked, where the walls remain uncovered by gold or silk. In these empty, cathedral-like spaces, there is no sense of failure or incompletion. Instead, there is a profound, beautiful sense of infinite possibility. The raw red brick stands as a silent testament to the sheer scale of a dream that was too grand, too magnificent, and too boundless to ever be fully contained within the physical limits of a single human lifetime. The air inside these vast, empty halls is cool, still, and incredibly heavy with peace. It acts as a thick, protective shield for your thoughts, completely insulating your mind from any remaining anxieties, stresses, or noises of your daily life. Here, in the deep, silent heart of an island palace, you are completely removed from the demands of human society. You are wrapped in the timeless, majestic comfort of a sanctuary built specifically to keep the outside world permanently at bay, allowing your spirit to settle into a state of deep, undisturbed, and effortless relaxation. Finally, let your spirit rise smoothly out of the island palace and float high across the sleeping valleys, returning to the majestic white towers of Neuschwanstein Castle. Step inside the absolute center of the magnificent Singers' Hall at 5 o'clock in the morning. The vast space is beautifully illuminated by the soft, silver light of the setting moon streaming through the high, arched glass windows. The beautiful frescoes depicting the ancient, sacred legends of the Holy Grail look down from the walls with a quiet, timeless wisdom that completely settles the soul. Imagine walking slowly across the highly polished parquet floors of this grand hall, completely alone in the midnight stillness. Your slow, rhythmic breathing moves softly in the cool air, creating tiny, gentle mists that vanish into the high timber ceilings. Everywhere you look, you see the delicate, graceful symbol of the swan, the beautiful emblem of spiritual purity, artistic elevation, and permanent peace. This hall was Ludwig's ultimate temple of the mind, the place where he felt completely free from the heavy chains of his physical crown, existing purely as a child of art and imagination. As you stand by the high glass windows of this grand hall, look out one last time at the vast, silent Bavarian landscape sleeping peacefully far below you. The deep, dark lakes of the Alpsee and the Schwansee look like massive, polished sapphires resting quietly in the white snow, perfectly reflecting the infinite stars of the universe. The dark pine forests stretch out for miles into the dark horizon, a vast, protective ocean of green and white that guards the base of your high stone fortress from the rest of the world. In this elevated, quiet space, you can finally hear the true, eternal message of the Swan King's journey. It is a message that tells you that it is completely safe to let go of the practical, noisy world, that it is beautiful, right, and necessary to protect your own internal sanctuary of dreams from the cold demands of your daily life. He built these magnificent palaces not to trap his spirit in the past, but to create a permanent physical proof that the human soul possesses the divine capacity to create its own heaven, its own peace, and its own timeless beauty, completely independent of the circumstances of the earth below. Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, and Chiemsee stand tonight not as dead museums of history, but as living, breathing guardians of the human imagination. They are eternal beacons of pure light, casting their silver reflections across the fabric of time, reminding us to always look up at the ancient stars and find our own unique path to rest. The grand symphony of stone, gold, music, and shadow has found its perfect, ultimate resolution in the absolute stillness of this winter night. Now, let the grand, magnificent images of the white mountain towers, the infinite golden mirrors, the raw brick cathedrals, and the silent white swans slowly, steadily, and softly fade into the quiet, healing darkness of a deep midnight freeze. The master artists have laid down their brushes. The royal musicians have gone to sleep. The candles have all burned down to cold, silent wax, and the entire landscape of Bavaria is wrapped in a profound, heavy, and absolute silence. A quiet so deep that it safely envelopes your thoughts, easing your mind into a state of total, undisturbed, and deep rest. Inside your own quiet room tonight, you are completely safe, perfectly protected, and beautifully insulated from any remaining noise, stress, or chaos of the outside world. The heavy, exhausting anchors of your daily responsibilities have been completely and permanently lifted away from your spirit, leaving your consciousness perfectly free to float into the soft, velvet shadows of a long, deep, and restoring sleep. You do not have to worry about the difficulties of tomorrow. You do not have to carry the heavy regrets of yesterday, and you do not have to answer to any human expectation. You are resting safely on the quiet, untouchable shore of an eternal sanctuary that belongs entirely to your own imagination. Let yourself drift away now into the calm, dark, and beautiful water of a long, peaceful sleep. Let your mind become as perfectly smooth, still, and undisturbed as the winter surface of the alpine lakes beneath the silver light of the moon. The Swan King has successfully transformed his entire universe into an eternal symphony of pure beauty, and tonight, the guardian echoes of that music stand as a silent watch over your own journey through the quiet hours of the night. Sink down deeper now into the soft, luxurious comfort of the shadows, wrapped forever in the sapphire silk, silver swans, and timeless music of a beautiful, unchanging dream. The story has been told, the symphonies are silent, the castles are at rest, and the entire cosmos is at absolute peace. Sleep now, quiet traveler, sleep deeply, and let the magnificent King of Dreams guide your spirit safely into the infinite, healing silence of the night. Sleep, sleep, and drift away into the eternal peace of the night.